Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Castle of Horror podcast, a show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we're in part 2 of our Evil Dead Retrospective with Evil Dead 2 from 1987. Bear in mind that if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to talk about it from the perspective of horror movie fans who have. So there are spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen this movie, you should have seen it already, but if not, go out and watch it, come back. This is a major horror film, so we're kind of guessing most people have, and that's why you're going to be tuning into the show. So anyway, I'm Tony Salvaggio, and I'm subbing in for Jason. And I'm lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars. And also I do the manga-influenced comic Psycom, as well as a steampunk book for humanoids called Clockworks. We also have, in Austin, Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running Halloween Man from Monsterverse Comics. Say hey, Drew.
Hey, Drew.
Nice.
And, I never get tired of doing that.
Yeah, it works every time. I'm down. Max Meehan is a screenwriter, filmmaker, and the owner of the independent pro wrestling company Inspire Pro. Say hey, Max.
Hello.
And in Los Angeles, we have Adam Foshko, story and creative consultant for the acclaimed Call of Duty series, as well as screenwriter and creative producer of the wildly successful Skylander series. What up, Adam?
Hey, how's it going tonight?
Cool, it's going well. Good to have you guys again. Again, we're doing Evil Dead 2. It's referred to publicly as Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn in publicity materials in 1987. It's a comedy horror film directed by Sam Raimi and a parody sequel to the 1981 film Evil Dead, which we did last week. The film was written by Raimi and Scott Spiegel. They collaborated on Crime Wave as well, which was my endorsement from last week, and produced by Robert Tabbert, and it stars Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams yet again. So let's get our first impressions. Let's go Max, Adam, Drew, and then I'll go last.
Okay. I go first, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, it actually hasn't been as long since I've seen this one. I probably see this one at least once a year. So it was still fun, but it wasn't as much of a surreal delight as revisiting the original after so long. I also kind of went into it with last week's discussion in mind about it feeling a little bit more sleek. It still definitely feels, in my opinion, like a B production. It still feels like something that's a smaller film. It had a larger budget than the original, but it's still a smaller production. Seeing this, it almost feels like you're watching Raimi, and Tony and I discussed this. It's like when you see an artist play a song that's like a hit repeatedly. It really feels like he's hitting the notes really definitively. He's got the flavor sussed out, and Raimi knows what he's doing. And but still, it feels really dirty and really gritty. It may even for me feel a lot dirtier than the first. That's my impression of it after today.
Interesting. So, Adam?
Well, I actually agree with Max to a certain extent. This is also a film that stays on my rotation. And it for me, I think even more than the first one, which to me always felt like a really grisly, dirty, edgy, kind of messy horror picture, but super small, like a USC film project gone, horribly right, with buckets of blood and horribleness, and but very, very, very small, low budget, but good stuff in it. This feels like I think a smaller picture, certainly by comparison, to the third installment. But for me, I think this is where I could see Raimi actually, for the first time, maybe, at least in my mind, orchestrating the notes that sort of worked in the first one, but with a lot more command. But this also, I think we begin to see Raimi being Raimi here. It's done with a lot more tongue-in-cheek to just all-out, slapstick humor than I think even the first one. So this, more than just a pure horror picture, this really becomes this coalescence of grisly horror, but then when the blood really gets to be a lot and almost too much, it almost becomes laughable because there's just so much blood. The slapstick comes in, and you get this sort of thing, which is a lot more like a splatter comedy, which should not really be a genre. But for some reason, I think this is I think part of Raimi's gift here, and I think we see it for the first time where he's doing it really intentionally in this movie, and because of it, I think I don't feel like it's dirtier than the first one. I think it's definitely a B picture, but it embraces it so fully that I think that it's done with, the edges are sort of being knocked off of it progressively. I think later in the next picture we really do see him coming into his full Raiminess, but this is a really, this is like a guy who's now starting to run, and we're running with him, and I think he single-handedly invents, a new subgenre, kind of head and shoulders above others that try to do the same thing. He really begins to define the genre, I think, with this picture even more than Evil Dead 1. So I happen to really like it, and it never really gets old. The first one gets a little dirgy. I couldn't watch that all the time because this feels really small and messy, but I like it a lot. It's just one that I remember more fondly. But this one really seems to hold up for me. So I really like it.
Cool. Drew?
Well, like these other two gentlemen, this movie is in my regular rotation. Actually, for many years, it was the only Evil Dead movie that I owned, and it's my favorite Sam Raimi movie. If I have to pick one, and I think having watched the first one last week, I think the thing that I was concerned, I guess concerned's not quite the right word, but I was expecting to happen is for this movie to feel a lot less dark because the first one is so grungy and is so grimy. But actually what I found is that there are moments where I think that this movie is actually even bleaker than the first one, and the comedy only kind of enhances that because you're sort of laughing at this poor schlub's really pretty intense suffering, actually, if you're going to take yourself out of the movie and think logically about what's going on in the screen, because I also think this is the definitive Evil Dead movie. I think it's so good that people actually graft on aspects of this movie to the other two. I think people remember the first one being funnier and the third one being gorier. And this hands down to me is the best of the original trilogy. It's just so iconic and awesome, and Bruce Campbell being Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi being Sam Raimi. It's just a great movie. And Max, I want to say that is a great analogy about this being a musician going back to some time-tested material and being able to really bring it. I think that's a perfect way to put it.
Thank you. I actually got to say that I also agree with you regarding the humor, making the more violent parts feel more, it really brings them out. It's like, the saying, you can't really have, the light without the darkness, and vice versa. The humor is really it's subversive. It makes it makes really horrible things more palatable, and probably a little bit more horrible, which is one of the things that makes this movie so special. It's some of it kind of reminds me of some of the violence in Verhoeven's RoboCop. When Ed 209 shoots that guy toward the beginning of the film, like when they put it out in theaters, they cut that, but when you watch the unedited version, the shooting is much more prolonged to the point that it becomes absurd and actually really funny. But you shouldn't be laughing at that. It makes it palatable, it makes it easier to accept, but it's also really disturbing that at the same time you're laughing at that.
Yeah. Well, that's what this movie does. Adam just said it. There's been probably at this point thousands actually of imitators of this style of movie,
Sure.
and maybe some of Peter Jackson's early movies, maybe, but seldom do I think anybody's come even close to matching the sort of ghoulish wonderment that you get out of watching Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, I think even Bad Taste, Dead Alive, like it kind of you get it, and it's similar. It's kind of weird to see kind of those and how they approach it, because it's a fundamentally different. There's similarities, but it's a fundamentally different kind of thing. Whereas Raimi's kind of coming more from a Stooges angle, especially if you watch, the early films that you can see in like that Bruce Campbell documentary where they're all filming and running around and doing stuff. But for me, for my first impression, like I saw, I mentioned it last time. I saw the trailer when I went to see Dream Warriors. And that trailer just scared the crap out of me because it was one of the first. Also, Dream Warriors was one of the first horror movies. Like, I was old enough to where they'd finally let me in the theater and not hassle me and everything like that. And so that was really cool. Then when I finally saw it, I rented it at my grandfather's where I would stay during the summer. He lived kind of out from town, and there's like a train that would pass by, and there was an older house, and so it would creak and stuff like that. And I was really freaked out by this movie, and even though I thought it was really great, and like, even the comedy part. So I was like telling my girlfriend at the time, you got to see this movie. It was so scary. So we watched it with her and her brother and his girlfriend, and maybe even a couple other people. And afterwards, she's like, that wasn't scary at all. That was just funny. And I was like, well, you should have seen it when I saw it. It was scary then, But I think you see a lot of that kind of slapstick, and a lot of times it kind of needs that. And I agree also that it kind of made its own genre. Like, so there was horror and there was parody, and you had stuff like, Student Bodies in 1981,
right.
And stuff like that. But there wasn't the same kind of like gleeful combination that you see in Evil Dead 2. It really brought it together, and the levity both gets really brutal, but then you're like, oh, okay, well, it's okay to laugh at this, even though, because if it was just that dark, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what happens in the new one, and we'll discuss that in a couple of weeks. Oh yeah, Darren in the chat room brought up American Werewolf in London. That's true. But
American Werewolf in London, the comedy is more character-based.
Yeah, it's not a slapstick. This purely goes, I mean, it's like what we were talking about before. This is Raimi, like, he's got, some more stuff under his belt. He's really like, I get to make the thing I really wanted to make for a long time. And the camera angles and the, sound effects and the gore and everything kind of get distilled into this, like, fine Raimi, ichor like you have. It's just like it's pureness. It's like the cold brewed coffee of Raimi here.
I also
think
that
it's really, really good.
Interesting enough, we talk about films that have been influenced, or how it kind of like maybe sparked a weird the gore horror genre. But I think like a lot of the more immediate people that were influenced by Raimi and what he did, particularly with this film, are guys like Tsui Hark. I don't know if you've seen any of the Chinese Ghost Story. You see that like Hark really, Ching Su Tung used that that same method with the camera tied to the board. You see that in this film and that film, and while the films aren't necessarily as gory, they do depend on kind of inserting humor into that really bleak atmosphere to kind of make you feel a little bit more at ease, so they can draw you in. So I guess like on a cerebral level, a lot of the Chinese were really into what he did with this film. Even the frames per second is something that Hark mentions that he stole from Raimi. Like he's a huge admirer. So yeah, you're totally correct in that this is just definitive stuff that you could really start to see leave an impression on filmmakers who are watching this stuff all around the world, not even just America, but just around the planet.
And, as we start, right into it, what you get at the beginning is also like, he goes, okay, well, that last movie, I'm going to remake part of that. Well, at the beginning, we get an explanation of the Necronomicon, and that's kind of interesting because it's got all the weird effects, and you're like, whoa, okay, this is a bigger budget thing. He's got room to kind of do this stop motion Necronomicon, and he's,
correct me if I'm wrong, it's called something, if I remember correctly, and that's something I remember thinking about last week. This is actually the first movie where it's called the Necronomicon. I can't remember what it was called in the original.
Yeah, it was called something else earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, in here, they're, Kandarian demons until the end when they call them Deadites and when he goes back, in time. But, for the purposes of this movie, they're demons. They're Kandarian demons. And but you get that, and you're like, wow, okay, this really kind of stepped things up. And then you get basically the trip to the cabin, and within a short space, you've got what amounts to a smaller version of the first movie, up until the sunlight gets rid of the demon in Ash, and all this
really
stuff you get is really.
Yeah, really have to distinguish, too, that this is very much a sequel. Like, a lot of people look at this and go, oh, this is a remake. They don't seem to, extract that, this picks up at some point where the first one does leave off. It's just that the intro is just a little bit, the way he abbreviates it and changes certain things, some people just get the impression that this is just a complete remake or a rehaul or reboot, but no, it's not. It's very much a sequel, or at least I perceive it to be a sequel. And I know a lot of people who've written about it say that.
I at first, it's been a while because I saw this one first, of course, and then saw the earlier one and was like, wow, that's weird. They did all this stuff. This is kind of like a remake, at the time. Then rewatching it, I was, you kind of see where it's almost that other one was almost a dream, and this is kind of how it happened this time around, or whatever. It's the retelling, and then from there it extrapolates from that retelling, and I thought that was kind of clever, actually.
I do love what Bruce Campbell says about all that on the commentary. He says, people ask me, why would Ash ever go back to that cabin? He's like, Ash is an idiot and a jerk. So
you know what's awesome? And part of my notes is, when Ash comes, he gets to the cabin, and there's all that talk especially in the commentary of the first one, where he's like, he wanted to be more romantic and everything. So we get also, not only do we get the distilled Raimi, we get the distilled Ash, because he plays piano and he's smooth, and then he's like the ladies' man, kind of, sort of, except he's kind of bad at it, like the slapstick part of where he's like, okay, baby, haha, And so all of that stuff comes through that he kind of wanted to do in the first one and didn't. And then you get, the distilled version of that in Ash, up until the point where, demonic crazy business starts to happen. So.
Well, you never really, unlike in the first one, they're not trying to play with your perception that anybody else is the hero of this movie either. Like, you know from the get-go that Ash is going to be the guy. And, there's the sort of generically 80s blonde, good-looking guy that they bring in, but, I mean, he's...
Right.
There's never really, kind of misdirect with that character. You kind of know that guy's demon food.
Right. Oh, by the way, it was funny. I was talking today. My friend Antonio mentioned that in Latin America, this was called El Despertar del Diablo, The Devil Awakens. And so when they saw it, they didn't know this was Evil Dead 2. This was like a new movie. And everybody's kind of like, hey, wait, we know that character. But when it was kind of announced, like you're like going to see, I'm going to go see The Devil Awakens, and then you get a sequel. So how, that's kind of crazy to, it would be interesting to kind of discover it that way, in the same way that,
I kind of wonder if that's why it is a semi-remake in places, is because they figured because it had more money, they might be reaching people who had never even seen the original Evil Dead. And I
didn't have the rights to the footage though either. That's another thing that I read, was that they couldn't get the rights to the original footage, so they had to redo some of it, like completely reshoot it. Or at least that's what I keep reading in a lot of the notes, is that they had no access to the footage, so that they couldn't just, use it to retell the story. And so in that position, they kind of changed things along the way. I know that also Campbell has touched upon the idea that when you see, this is jumping ahead, but in Army of Darkness, when you see him at S-Mart and he's retelling the story, it kind of casts the entire series as being from the perspective of an incredibly unreliable narrator, which
Absolutely.
is kind of how he describes why things are different in the recounting. But yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Like you're kind of getting this from some completely batshit guy that's gone through some really incredible things, and he probably is prone to bend the truth.
Right.
I like that explanation. I think I will accept that as my own fan version of things from here on out.
Sure. Yeah, that works. But but even at the beginning, we get some great effects, like where his girlfriend gets taken over. You get the trope. Also, the cabin itself has a character, and it's watching this again too. I was like, wow. Cabin in the Woods, they play with it so much more than I thought, or that I remembered in Cabin in the Woods. Like, seeing this again, especially when he's being chased around, you see all the places he can go in the cabin. Like, that was really neat as well. But all the stuff, where he's like chasing him down and he cuts off her head, he's pulled around, and like it happens in so much more of a compressed time frame than I remembered as well. And that was really, I think, that comes with rewatching it. But, all that stuff is such great business with, really good. And this is one of those films, too, where you go, okay, practical effects, sometimes it looks a little goofy, but in the right spots, it's just leaps and bounds over the kind of
because it has all the tangible quality. Yeah, it's all tangible.
Sure.
Like, even on some level, it existed. Whereas CGI, it never existed. So, even for me, I'll take anything out of a George Powell or Harryhausen film over anything that's CG any day, because even if it is obviously fake, there's still that quality that it's real. Because even when I'm seeing CGI, I still know it's not real. I never see CG and go, whoa, that took me. But, I know that it was never tangible. So, I mean,
Sure.
Yeah.
That's something we actually talked about a lot when we did all those Harryhausen films a while back. And I like the stop motion stuff here quite a bit. I think it works within the atmosphere of the movie, because it's got this, I always feel like stop motion has this sort of dreamlike, or in this case, nightmarish quality to it. And like particularly the scene where the zombified girlfriend who now has a severed head kind of does like almost a mock striptease on this freaking creepy ass tree, and that's like an oddly haunting scene. The way she dances around with her head, and it's got like the creepy piano love scene music playing, and it's really effective and, really dreamlike. I love that sequence.
I don't know why, but it always reminded me of the Edward Gorey mystery theater thing on PBS, that scene.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, again, I think it informs eventually the people who like this. I think, they're going to see, Nightmare Before Christmas. That kind of, stop motion stuff, like it resonates, and so I think that's why a lot of, not just because it's Tim Burton and it resonates with certain, people, misfits, etc., but I think a lot of horror kids dig it because they've seen stuff like this, and they also dig Harryhausen, and it was the logical progression to, to that kind of stuff. Like, you're like, oh, yeah. Because I totally agree. I think those sequences are really great. And there's, great facial transformation sequences, and, like, they weren't, they weren't above like, oh man, maybe what happens if it looks this way? They're just like, oh, we're gonna go for that, and you know, we're gonna blend all this stuff that we love into this movie, and you know, it comes across really well.
Yeah, it's almost done gleefully, I think, which is the thing. They just kind of say,
I
almost like
agree.
they're making it obviously to sell, but it's really like they suddenly have been given more money and they're making it for themselves. So they're really kind of going for the thing that makes them laugh or makes them, you know, resonates with them, and they're really pursuing it gleefully, and it really comes across almost sort of, you know, these moments of the sort of great abandon where, you know, it becomes, you can see the kind of almost the joy that they probably put into it, and they're making something very, very specific, and it's really interesting. I think it comes across in the picture. And
I think, you get things, you know, it can work both ways. Like sometimes you'll get people who will get way more money and they're kind of out of their depth, and it kind of falls apart. But you know, again, since it's, you know, 6 years later, when this is released, you still have, like, you know, like what we're talking about. You have somebody who's got a better command over their tools and, you know, what they want to do with things. I think the same thing with, you know, they mentioned it in Road Warrior. They're like, holy crap, we have all this money now? And you see somebody who's like, this is the film I wanted to make, or this is the film I'm going to make because, you know, I'm kind of more seasoned and I have this money to spend, and there's still that we should still conserve, and so they're being smart with their money, you know, as well.
Yeah, I think
as
it
having
comes across.
fun with
it comes across on the, you know, with the way they're pursuing it. I mean, I love Harryhausen and I love George Powell, you know, and I think some of it is what you're saying, which is, hey, we can make this effect, and it will not be an enormously expensive effect, but it also is the stuff that we like, and so therefore we're going to do it. This is, and we've said it in our own ways, I think, a couple of times, this is, you know, hands down, a B movie, but of the best kind. And unlike Road Warrior, which I think is set out to be just what it was going to be, this is embracing the fact that it is a sort of a massive B movie, and it's done really unapologetically. And I think that's you see some B movies and you go, well, you know, they were shooting for Citizen Kane, and we got this, and you go, it's kind of a B movie, and this is going to be all of a B movie, and it's going to, in the process,
very much an outsider film. It's like, to me, it feels outsider in terms of being a horror film because of the humor, I think, and it kind of goes back too because the feud or the statements between Craven and Raimi continue here because you see the Freddy glove and the shed, and this film
so
versus like, you know, A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a film that takes itself very seriously.
Yeah.
There's humor, there's streaks of humor, but it's nothing like you see in this film, which is almost antisocial and demented. Some of the things that they make you laugh at are just really troubling, you know, whereas in Craven's world, he wants you to take the threat very seriously. And here you've got Ash, who's almost kind of having this weird Stockholm syndrome experience where toward a certain part of the film, he's almost embracing the madness. Like, you know, when he's finally breaking down and all the animal heads are kind of laughing and he's laughing too, you almost very much feel that he's a part of this. Like he's just, you know, breaking down. But there's just this weird warmth to it that you shouldn't get out of it. You know, it's something that you didn't see in pop horror films at the time.
You know, it's kind of funny, the thing that you're talking about, this sort of like almost punk rock, you know, in your faceness that, you know, like this is inappropriate, but we're going to make it funny. And you're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. That is stuff that they did start to add into that franchise after, you know, later on, you know, like after the original one, they started progressively getting, you know, more and more tongue in cheek. But, you know, I think the thing that and this is one of the reasons why I like this better than Army of Darkness. I think the thing here is that Ash is still very, even though he's demented and you have this like the sense and the sort of almost cartoonish Daffy Duck insanity, he's still like, I feel like the stuff with his girlfriend, and maybe it's just because it's the two of them or whatever, but it's handled so much more effectively here, and I actually feel more for him anytime he seems sad over it. It's so much more believable. And so when there's the scene towards the end where he shakes off his possession when he sees that necklace, that actually works for me, and it makes Ash seem more than just a one-liner spouting, badass. There's a level of humanity there, and I really appreciate that kind of stuff.
And he's not even really a badass until he decides to, strap on a chainsaw, which, we've seen it a million times now, but at the time, that was awesome.
Well, I kind of will argue that
just cool.
I kind of will argue that he's able to kind of step over that place, and the point where he does shake off his possession is the point where he becomes the heroic, more the monster slaying Ash that we think of. And it's because I think that point is like, okay, you can't have your way with me anymore. I've had enough. And
right.
That to me is the pivotal. I cannot talk right tonight. The pivotal scene for that character.
Right. I thought it was also interesting. I'd kind of forgotten that in this film, we get the part from the previous film where the daylight kind of, gets rid of the demons. But in general, eventually the demons kind of they didn't have to really, he gets bit on his hand and his hand goes crazy. But in general, like there's, the blonde guy, like he just kind of gets taken over. And Ash does again as well. It's almost like, a Venom kind of thing. Like, okay, well, a demon, if it's powerful enough, it can take over the guy. He gets hit on his head, but he's, in general, when he's jumping up and moving and he's kind of floating, like that kind of came out of nowhere. And you get this, it's kind of almost more of a sense of dread where anybody can be one of these demons if it's just given just the slightest bit of chance. And I, also going back to the Glee thing, like the hand part where, his hand gets possessed and it's dragging him, and there's the little like sounds and the sound design in general as well is just phenomenal. The part where there's the part where you have all this asynchronous sound of them looking around, and you get the impression that the demons are like going all over the room, and they're looking at it, and it's a very, again, you can tell the great love they had for like Stooges and stuff like that, great physical comedy stuff, and that in conjunction with what they do with all the sound rushing around and, just horse galloping and just all kinds of crazy camera angles. It's off-putting and yet humorous at the same time. Very few people have been able to do that, even as an homage, and pull it off, I think, as well as, Raimi and company did in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I do want to go back to, by the way, is the grit. There's one movie for me that is one of the dirtiest feeling films of all time, where like when I watch it, I just feel dirty. And that is Peck and Paw's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. That film just feels grimy and gritty to me. And while I think that some of the violence might not be as hard-hitting because it's not presented in such a dry fashion as the original film, there at the end or even the midpoint of this movie, I just feel dirty when I look at Ash. He just looks so disgusting. He's caked with blood and filth and grime. And I think that's where I was coming with the griminess of the film. It definitely has some new textures to show. I look at him and just go, oh my God, he must feel foul. When he finally gets to clean up an army of darkness, being so familiar with this film, I feel that him coming out of the bath. That's like, yeah, okay. But while it's total lunacy, abound in this particular film, I feel like they really take Ash and run him through a ringer. Also interesting is I almost feel this film kind of happens backward, whereas in the first film, you know, he starts out with a bunch of people, and while there's that you know, reintroduction to the events, he really kind of starts out alone and then acquires his companions, and, you know, ultimately to just lose them again. I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it. I don't really think I realized that until I saw Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead last week, where he starts out alone in this film. You know, starts out fairly populated in the first film, and winds up, you know, with this big group of people, which is something that you rarely see in a movie, where someone starts out alone and gains people. It's kind of like similar to Night of the Living Dead in a way.
You know, it certainly was flying in the face of the conventions of the popular horror franchises of the day. And you know, one of the things I think that actually makes this movie still kind of frightening to me is the fact that he's alone, because, you know, we were talking about the demons earlier. They could take him anytime they wanted to. You know, they make that abundantly clear. Like, these demons can overpower you anytime that they feel like it. They just want to torment you. Like, that is what they're about. So they're just tormenting this poor guy and driving him insane. And that's really scarier than, you know, just say, like, being, you know, torn apart and you're dead. You know, instead it's like this prolonged agony, because, you know, and a lot of the damage he ends up having to do, you know, he has to cut off his own hand. And, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth about Campbell as an actor over the years. Like, for the people who say that Campbell can't act, like, just watch that scene where he's interacting with his own hand, and his hand has a mind of its own, and then he stabs himself in the hand with a knife and has to act simultaneously agonized but happy about the fact that he's stopped his hand. I mean, that's just an amazing bit of business right there.
I think if anybody says he can't act, I think they're really, like, there's a difference between can't act and being a character actor. Like, I think he's definitely a character actor, and I think he's fully embraced that. I mean, you see him in appearances, you see him in documentaries and stuff like that. I don't think you have a problem with that at all. To say he can't act, I think that's BS. You know, he's not the conventional actor. His range, you know, but I mean, also people give him Bruce Campbell parts a lot of times, right? Like, when you're a character actor, you tend to kind of get those parts, and that's fine too. You know, there's a long history of that. I mean, watching a lot of different actors turn up in Twilight Zone as I'm rewatching that, you know, a lot of these actors didn't really fall far from what they were when they were in Twilight Zone, you know. And so seeing that, like, there's a long history of that. And I think, you know, saying, oh, he's a bad actor, that's crazy. He does a really good job. I also like, you know, when you're talking about them tormenting, that's something else that I went through, was, like, how much they're messing with him. Also, how scary. You know, I think they're really smart, too, because it's what he sees when he's driving, in that, like, sound and the chase cam that keeps chasing him and going through all the building and, like, looking around and kind of just retreating just because, like, oh, well, I can get him later. I can get him anytime I want. Actually, all of that, to me, is more scary than when you actually see the kind of giant, crazy creature at the end, which is fun and neat. But I think, you know, filling in the blanks of what just this huge beast, you know, almost kind of Lovecraftian kind of thing must be, is, you know, the payoff. I don't know if it was as scary as what I could have imagined when he's just truly just driving hellbent to get away from it. I think there's something, and they were really smart about the sound design. It still really holds up. I mean, it's a work of art.
You bring up a really good point. The sound design, I mean, this goes back to the sort of the smart way they put this picture together, and the fact that they really threw everything at it. I think the same thing can be said about Campbell. Campbell isn't so much an actor here as he is a co-conspirator. And I think certain actors can kind of bear the weight of a film in kind of whatever they're in. They're just sort of good actors, and you can see Anthony Hopkins and you go, put him in Free Jack, and it's like he's still Anthony Hopkins, and you go, okay, sure.
Right.
You've got, I think, actors by and large, some can surpass the skill, or they can actually surpass the picture that they're in, or the skills of the director. But I think in this particular case, rather than people who give Bruce Campbell roles, I think this was one of those instances where he was very much a collaborator and a co-conspirator, and this picture was really made for him, with him, and you see that come out on the screen. It's the perfect coalescence, perfect partnership, really, of director and actor in this genre, in this movie, and I think this is a very unique case. And I think Bruce Campbell has done certainly other movies, but I think he may not have had as fruitful a collaboration with other directors who could not just get the most out of him, but actually could craft a movie that would take the most advantage out of his particular skills as an actor. And so that gulf, I think, is what we see sometimes in something like, Moontraps, or something like that, where you go, hey, it's Bruce Campbell, and you go, well, there are Bruce Campbell's moments in it, but the movie doesn't really hold up, or there are missed opportunities there. And I think that's really what we're seeing. I think it has less to do with a blanket statement like he can't act, and more to do with the fact that, this is just the partnership between, a gifted director and a gifted actor for this kind of movie, for, in this moment, in this relationship. He obviously can, but he's, it comes down to the formula of the picture and the director as well. It's definitely a collaboration. And, he just may not have had that again in quite the same way as he did the Evil Dead series.
I also think that, like, if you say he's a bad actor, it's almost kind of like, well, would you call Harold Lloyd a bad actor? Would you call Jackie Chan a bad actor? Because you have to look at the role, too, and what it commands. Yes, it's campy in parts, but it's intended to be campy. It's intended to be kind of broad. He's not going in with a Scorsese script. He's doing something that is determined to be something that's kind of fun and demented. And yeah, Tony's absolutely correct. He's been kind of typecast. I think the Ash character too is very much an extension of Campbell himself. And I say that by having experience working with him on a short film. I worked on a short film with him when I was younger, and the director and the producer, first of all, he called me baby several times, and I was like 16, and that was really kind of like, it felt like I was dealing with Ash. And I remember the day of the shoot, he showed up, and he asked for more money, and they had to find out how to get the money, and if they couldn't get the money, he basically elaborated, sorry, baby, no cash, no Ash. And it was very much, it's very much in the tone of Ash from Evil Dead. I didn't feel like I was dealing with Bruce Campbell. I felt like, well, maybe this character that he's, like you said, conspirator is such a perfect term. Maybe that's just who he is. I think he does a phenomenal job here, like likening him to Harold Lloyd, who is just insanely just like one of the greatest screen presences of all time, just one of the greatest performers on screen of all time. He's a presence and he's a performer. There are two types of actors, in my opinion. There are actors and then there are screen presences, and I think he runs the gamut here. He deserves a lot more credit than he gets.
Yeah, well, you know what you're talking about. Like I've seen him speak. He did a couple of Draft House things, and on the one hand, I've seen him talk about maybe he's a little regretful about being typecast so much that he would like roles. He's like, look, I'm an actor. I kind of want to do other things, but I think since it taps into what you're talking about, where it's kind of an extension of him, that he kind of can't help but put a little bit of that in it. I think it got bigger than he perhaps wanted to. And I always just from seeing a little bits here and there, you kind of get the impression he's like, oh, man, for once I kind of do wish they would quit making me Ash in these moments. But, it's kind of become a monster. But, he's in other stuff where he's, really great too, where he's not that. I think it's definitely the double-edged sword of being, like you said, a screen presence.
Well, I always think
ways.
about, this is another horror film, but or monster movie or whatever you want to call it. But he's really great in Bubba Hotep, and he's playing an elderly man and an elderly Elvis at that, and you buy it. And he's
so good in that.
Yeah, so like I think if you're to compare him, in this versus him in that, I mean, okay, yeah, there's a couple of similarities like in their way, but I mean, they're still two very distinct characters too. So he doesn't get nearly enough credit, and it is exactly like what Max is saying. He does have this real gift for physical comedy that a lot of modern actors don't have. I mean, in another world, he probably could have had a really great career as a comedian, like along the lines of like Jim Carrey or something like that, because he is so good at like throwing himself around and contorting his body and into these weird positions. Right.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And, going back, like, I think, we're getting close to the end, but how it's also the double-edged sword of how many times since this movie has Groovy become, like, the horror movie thing to say. I mean, that scene alone, when he's had enough, and he decides it's time to just go completely bonkers. And, if you've seen it, if this is your first time seeing it, you're like, where's this coming from? And here's a man who, figures out how to strap a chainsaw to himself and rig it so he can start it up. And he's going to go fight the enemies with a chainsaw in one hand and a shotgun in the other. Like, that's a horror hero right there. That's the stuff that, often imitated but never duplicated, I think.
He's the Peter
fit.
Cushing of the 80s.
Yeah, I mean that scene and the lead up to that with the ting tong ting tong, we'd kind of seen it in Rambo and people had aped that, Commando. But man, seeing that where it's just all the sounds building up to that and then Groovy. They're just you can't help it. Groovy
is the line that everybody remembers, and I will freely admit that this movie is the reason why I put it into my regular use of slang as a teenager. But my favorite line, or one of my favorite lines in the movie is, "Now let's go down to the cellar and carve ourselves a witch." And there was like I've even heard that line like used as a soundbite in lots of punk rock songs, and such a great Bruce Campbell line.
Who's laughing now? Who's laughing now? Really sticks in my head because he is just so goddamn smug. Like, there's a lot of smugness in him, but he's picking himself apart in the process. But that "who's laughing now" line before he cuts off his own hand, to me, is almost just like, my God, I wish someone had cast him as the Joker at some point during his tenure, because no one is that just smug and just gleeful. I mean, I could see him doing that role at some point.
He would actually be a really great Joker. He would have been completely different than I think any of the versions that we've had, and good as many of them have been. But I actually could see him being actually a little bit closer to the one we have in the comics in a lot of ways. Certainly with his profile that he had at this time, where he was, thinner but still had that really long jawline and more pointed features.
He has very elastic features in this film.
Yeah, and that also starts the that's also the thrust for the third act, where you've gotten a lot of characters that have come and gone and been killed, and where he's going to go down in there and hey, we don't have this like door we're trying to keep shut. We're actually going to cut a hole in that, and we're going to go after what we need to go after, because he's got to summon a beast. So first they're going to summon something that they have no idea what this thing is going to be, and then they've got to send it off into the abyss, hopefully, if they read these crazy runes. And here we have a guy who's like, I've had enough. Sure, I'm going to summon a demon, and then I'm going to get somebody to read, and we're going to hopefully send it back. That's some take charge action horror. This isn't somebody hiding and then hoping they can stab the slasher or whatever. This is like full on, almost action movie in some ways idea, which you can't help but feel good at that point. Like, all right, things are going to happen now.
After seeing him get clobbered for like 30 minutes or 40 minutes, you do go, that point where he puts the chainsaw on and saws off the edge of the shotgun, you're like, let's anytime I've seen this movie with a crowd, there's inevitably huge cheers for the time he revs up that chainsaw the first time.
Yeah. I wish I could have seen, this is definitely one where I wish I could have seen it first run in the theater. I've seen it in the theater since then, but I really wish I could have seen it with an audience first run.
I did, and it was strangely empty at the time. When I saw it on a Friday night. I saw it when it opened, and it was dead. It was kind of odd. But I went back and saw it as many times as I could, and then I remember the theater that I was, like in my town, pulled it pretty abruptly. There were a lot of movies like that just kind of got pulled abruptly that I thought were great, and that I think maybe needed a little bit of time to, develop word of mouth. But yeah, I saw it. I've never seen it in a full theater. I would love to see it in a full theater. I've seen it in theaters, never with like, a huge crowd that really appreciates it.
Right. Well, now it's kind of different too, because you have the people who can quote every line. You know what I mean? Like when you go to see a Draft House screening, and I've seen some good ones, but it's kind of, even that has a different flavor. Like, it's fun to see with your friends who are also fans. That's always fun. I
remember,
but it's kind of different seeing it with like a bunch of people who are now just discovering that, who they for the first time, hear the groovy line. That would be really cool,
I remember watching this for the first time with Jamie, and the only one she'd ever seen was Army of Darkness, which is a good movie, but much less fierce than this is. And that moment, even though she kind of knew it was coming, that moment where he straps on the chainsaw and you hear groovy, like she didn't get audible about it, but her eyes got like saucer like all of a sudden. It was like I could tell that was a real like, wow, what's going to happen now?
Right. And from there where they start to summon the beast, and they really pull out all the stops with like there's stop motion, there's all kinds of practical effects, there's
trees
a giant head.
The cabin.
It just gets like it just escalates so quickly.
I want to talk about the different types of monsters in this, because the conception of this movie, you ask a lot of people and they'll tell you it's a zombie movie, and it's not. I mean, there are definitely undead creatures in this that are zombie-like, but I don't, this is not a zombie movie the way Dawn of the Dead or, even Dead Alive are zombie movies. This
suffers from that because it has dead in the title, I think. I think that's just one of those, it's just there's some weird, ignorant generalization that, a lot of people there are people who celebrate this film who still don't even really pay attention to it, I think. I think it's become one of those films that takes on a life of its own, and people just kind of, they may discuss it and know the big beats and the lines, but I think that they don't really analyze it on the basis that us guys are doing right now.
I would
probably
agree.
right.
I think it's and that's just part of pop culture. I think we hit up on this too when we talked about Godzilla. We were like, the impression of Godzilla often eclipses. It's like what you bring into it, because most people have seen all three, like major fans, and then a lot of people maybe they'll watch the more quotable, for example, like Army of Darkness, and it all kind of, you get this like flavor of Evil Dead, and that's what you remember, and that's fine. I think that's really cool. There's an Evil Dead franchise, and that's part of your being as a horror movie fan. But unless you do watch it from time to time, I think that you're right in that a lot of people have the impression of what it is, but it's really demons, like flat out horrible, gonna taunt you demons, that are really, the crux of it, and they're really awful, like and they're cunning too. That's what we forget. That it portrays the girl's mother. Oh, get me out! Oh, I remember, and it knows all the things. And then we see her dad, who's being tormented in hell, briefly. In this kind of cool.
When he shakes off his possession, and the sort of archaeologist's daughter kind of continues to go after him with an axe, you can't really blame her for doing that because of everything.
Oh, of course.
You've seen these guys do building up to that.
And I love the bit too. I mean, he's got so much. That's what also makes Campbell, the physicality, where she looks and she's like, "Oh, I believe this is my mom. It's telling me things I know." And he looks at her and he just shakes his head and is like, "Nope, that's not your mom." There's nothing. He doesn't say anything, but the gravity of that. And she finally realized, like, you know what? That's true. This is not. And again, I think that's probably why people think of it, partially associated with zombie movies, where a lot of other people have to make that realization of, like, this zombie is no longer my family member or my friend.
There's the documentary that's on the Anchor Bay edition of the original movie. Even Joe Bob Briggs calls it a zombie movie. Even Joe Bob Briggs. And Joe Bob Briggs has probably written more about horror films from the 70s to the 80s than just about anybody. And,
yeah, that's true.
And even he calls it a zombie movie. So there is, and it could just be, it could just be something as simple as like, oh well, there's undead creatures and dead is in the title. But
the mom is definitely like a zombie-like, right? But she's more. I mean, when you look at it though, she's way more. Exorcist than she is zombie.
Well, they have a versatile set of powers. They can levitate. They can change shape. They can, you don't see Bob doing any of this shit.
No. Well, how about the one where, it's stop motion and his head becomes like a snake? And, just all, man, some
Follow your soul.
You can't even really say that anybody's dead conclusively. That's another thing, is that the Evil Dead is, you kind of like, that's what you kind of, they're these primordial things, right? But you can never really say that the victims, like the mother, she's not really, you don't know if she's dead. She's been possessed, and she may not appear to be human, but nobody that I think that becomes one of these things, like a Deadite or a Kandarian demon, is necessarily dead. It would almost be like, in my opinion, calling Reagan from The Exorcist when she's possessed. You'd never call her a zombie. She's inhuman.
Well, yeah, his girlfriend, he definitely cuts her head off. And supposedly the mother died because he buried her. I mean, supposedly.
And she's got her guts hanging out of her midsection. I mean, she's definitely not alive.
Well, I don't think she's ever going to come back to normal and be a part of the family on Christmas, but I think that, like all these characters have been possessed already by the time that they get handled,
Right.
Yeah, they're not going back to normal, but still they're, they were possessed before they were dismembered, So
sure.
Everybody that gets possessed, you just kind of assume, like she got buried probably because she got possessed, acted weird, and then they blew her head off and stuck her in the basement and tried to bury her or something like that, but she just kept coming. I'm just backing your point about them not really being clear-cut zombies. I will, like I said, it's definitely not what I think of
when I go like I want to watch a zombie movie, this is not the movie I grab for because it doesn't have the particular tropes of the zombie genre, other than there's some things rising from the grave at parts, but it doesn't have the whole apocalyptic theme that we've come to expect. Now you definitely they definitely started to kind of the hint on that in the original ending of Army of Darkness, but
Sure.
that and maybe we'll get to see that the Deadite apocalypse one day. But
so what do you guys like? I guess we probably should wrap it up soon. But
yeah.
coming back to what do you guys think of where this one kind of does the prophecy angle, where they even telegraph it as far as like, hey, look, here's a guy who has something on his hand. He's got what looks like this drawing, and then you thrust him into that at the very end, even with the car falling out and everything like that. Because there could have just as easily not been an Army of Darkness. Like, we talked about, this was getting pulled. It could have not done well. We would have never seen past, wow, that's crazy. Ash does this cyclical thing. What do you guys think about that ending and the prophecy as well as the time travel aspect?
I like it, and I like the fact that he continues to lose his mind even further, because I've always figured time travel would make you crazy. I don't think they do a particularly convincing job of making me think that that's anywhere in England, because I've been to England, and I've been to England, and I didn't see anything that looked like that.
By that? What?
Yeah, I always thought, for some reason in my head, I always kind of envisioned it as being them in the Crusades or something, because that's geographically kind of what it looks like, and also I thought it kind of would have played into the to the mythology of the Necronomicon, which is, I don't know, just historically doesn't really fit in with that stuff. I love the ending. It is such a harsh bummer ending. I remember. I think also the way it's done, the way it feels. I think I have a lot of resentment toward Army of Darkness, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that it just I don't feel like it did justice to that ending. It picks up at a different point. You get it completely. He winds up in a completely different position than what you see at the end here, where everybody's like going hail to the king, basically, like in that prophetic drawing. I love the ending. I don't like where the sequel picked up off of it.
Well, that's Army of Darkness doesn't. You're absolutely right. It doesn't really do a good job of picking up right where we see Ash here. And the Crusades would have been an extremely interesting direction to go with this, and it's certainly a horrific point in human history. So there's a lot of room to mine there. I was just let down that they changed the name, because the original name was going to be Medieval Dead.
So good.
And I always just thought that was like such a great title.
Right. Well, the Crusades would make sense. I mean, the Necronomicon, comes from pretty much a purely Lovecraft, Genesis, where he had he was a kid and he called himself, El Hazarad, and he made up this whole thing, and that came, he played like, I'm, an Egyptian, and that was part of it. And then people took that and went, no, there really was a Necronomicon. You'll still get people arguing that, no, there's a real thing, because I saw it, because it got made into a book. But it really, did come from Lovecraft's childhood, basically. And it's it's a cool thing, but, it was supposedly from, a mad Arab in Egypt, and we found it, under a pyramid or whatever. The story kind of morphs, but that would make sense. It's also, this kind of blasted hellscape. You get the impression that the Deadites have really kind of worked it over too, that it's not, necessarily England. It's somewhere where things have gone really wrong for a little while.
Well, when we eventually see more of it, I kind of accept it as a Ray Harryhausen fantasy scape that has gotten beat up. That's what I don't think of. I don't think of it as a historical place any more than I think of. I don't think of the Necronomicon in these movies as the same Necronomicon as Lovecraft. I think Raimi just appropriated the name.
Sure, of course. It's got some of the stuff, like there's, old creatures, right? Like, but it's the same. It's the same as anybody kind of like making it their own. Hey, I've read these stories. Hey, this is a cool thing. That's the Book of the Dead, because it's also called the Book of the Dead too, which is an Egyptian thing as well, like totally separately from the Necronomicon that's in Lovecraft. And so it's a kind of a combination and then a ramification of all of these things together.
Ramification.
I also I guess that's the thing. I'm going to go with that that's the thing. But I also dig that, you were saying how he does just go, this is a man who realizes, like, A, he's part of a prophecy. He may be doomed to repeat this because it's in this book and he's seen it. He's seen himself. And then, I may never get back home. And so all of this weight, like, oh, look, you're our savior. And he's like, this is still the worst thing. Like, this day has turned out even worse than I had imagined. Because now for him, it could be kind of a Groundhog Day kind of thing. Who knows? He's definitely probably never seeing the Earth he knew. Again, we go back to the Evil Dead 1, where once all that stuff's happened at the cabin, it's not like he's going to ever go back to normalcy by any stretch. So. Hello?
Yep. No.
We
were. Yeah. I thought you were.
We were all nodding in agreement.
I had a weird, like glitch on my phone. So. Yeah. But yeah.
This ending is definitely almost a John Carpenter ending, or what I tend to call a John Carpenter ending. It's a John Carpenter ending to a Sam Raimi movie. So I really like it. It doesn't. I don't love it to the point where I can't accept some of the changes that they make in Army of Darkness. I just wish they could have kept their continuity a little tighter. But I mean, these movies were made years apart, and obviously they weren't thinking that much about continuity. They were just trying to tell these berserk stories about Ash. And I'm very glad that we got the movies that we got.
I could have done with a better Army of Darkness. I guess I'm going to be the dissenter next week when it comes to Army. But I think that they had an opportunity to. What's that?
You won't be alone.
Okay. Yeah, I think that they had an opportunity to do something really, really unique and really, special. I think that, Tony, you called this almost a parody of the original. I think Army of Darkness is straight up parodic. I think that's why I've got an aversion to it. I think that I wish it had retained some of the darkness and some of the glee rather than just the straight humor. It just feels too dry to me, but we'll talk about that next week.
Well, I think also what you're kind of hitting on, again, you're totally right, we'll talk about it, is, what people felt like Freddy became eventually. He became more of a quipster and more of, like, less shocking, certainly. And some of that's fun, but it can go either way, and it can be, too much depending on what you're thinking. Yeah. And, that's the danger. I think most horror movie icons have come up from one thing and morphed into something greater or kind of almost more out of control, which is, I think, appropriate for horror. That's often, why we have horror.
There's
something starts as a kernel of something and infects our lives or our dreams or takes over, and that's kind of why we have horror. You can be afraid of spiders, but if you're, jumping at every spider and like spraying everything and you see spiders even where there are none, that's true horror. Or maybe some of these horror icons become that, or they start small and then become something much larger.
I think it's less cerebral than that. I think it's just pure commercialism. I think when you look at what, they had Freddy on everything. I'm surprised there wasn't a Freddy breakfast cereal, Freddy condoms, Freddy this, Freddy toys. They had a Freddy Madball, for God's sake. They were marketing toys to children, which is just the ultimate irony. Still. Yeah. So I don't think that what some of these things became was ultimately, I don't know. I don't see it as being part of the natural progression of where these things, should have gone. Maybe that's a fair fair term to use. But I definitely feel like there was probably a whole lot on the line with Army of Darkness, whereas Dino De Laurentiis isn't Universal Studios. He came, to quote the accent that Sam uses when he, when Dino approached him, he was like, "How much you want these pictures?" Like, he made him sound like this scurvy old pirate from the Mediterranean, So, Dino and his studio, they came from a very, very different place, and Universal, I think, had maybe much higher ambitions for the property. I think they saw that it had value, it did well in the home video market, and they thought they could do something that was more geared toward general audiences.
Right.
I actually wouldn't disagree with that. I think the truth of it is that the ending for this picture, I think it ends, in my opinion, the only way that it feels so enormously and weirdly satisfying. It ends in a way that you go, oh, this is the way it must end. Because of just even when Ash is, it feels like he's weirdly, oddly, horribly heroic in some way, but then so not through. This is the only way it could have ended. And the truth of it is that, it's so it's such a satisfying ending, even though it's so incredibly fucked up. And that's part of it. It's sort of it's satisfaction. It's like, this is great. It's just like the only way. This thing this thing could have ended, and it's great. And the promise of it, I think, is what we're reacting to with the next picture, is that there's something to it where you go, it sort of hit a new height even with the ending, and it sort of carries over into what your expectation is of the new film. And you're right. I think it was geared to a different audience. It was geared towards a much more commercial kind of fare, as opposed to the recipe, the exact recipe that this one had followed. And I think because of it, I think a lot of people will react to the promise or what could have been set up by this film, and kind of what's delivered. It's a completely different movie than what you would expect. And I think it's probably our expectations that set it up to fail. I mean, to be honest. That's it.
I don't want to continue to steer too much in the Army of Darkness, because I want to keep it fresh for next week. But
sure,
I will say this. This is about all that. This is my opinion. After watching the first one, I was expecting to come into this and this one and feel like this was the weaker, sillier version, and this one bulldozed over that. So I'm not going to take any expectations in the Army of Darkness. I haven't actually watched Army of Darkness in a long time. Okay. I own it. I enjoy it, but I don't watch it the way I watch this one. And I
think that's right. And I think that's right. You don't watch it like you watch this one. It, in its own merits, may be perfectly great, but I think that's the thing. You don't watch it like you do this one.
Well, as far as Ash goes as a pop culture icon, like, I love a lot of the pop culture horror stuff. My apartment is filled with monster models and stuff like that, and I kind of like that Ash is this pop culture figure. I even love the fact that I was listening, and I posted soundtrack on the Facebook group. I would love to see the musical, the Evil Dead musical that they did one day. I think that's genius. And
yeah, I mean, it's coming in September, if I'm not mistaken, because a bunch of Fantastic Fest people are going to go see it. So
I've wanted to see it ever since I first heard about it. So that may be my birthday present to myself before I leave for New York.
People were posting. Yeah, people were posting. I'll dig up the links. I'll post it on the page because it's relevant. So with that being said, we should probably get our final impressions and then do endorsements. So I guess let's work back. I guess let's work backwards. Drew, Adam, Max, and then myself.
Well, I'm just going to go out and say it. I think this movie is groovy, and I love this movie. You know, it's as far as Sam Raimi goes, it's this movie and Darkman that I repeatedly go back to.
I'll go with you on that.
And I just love this movie. It's seminal. It's one of the movies that made me want to write this kind of material. And I just dig it, and I definitely love it the best out of the three original Evil Dead movies, which isn't meant as a knock against the other two. It's just this one is such an amazing film to me, and it was great to talk about it.
Cool. Adam?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the pinnacle. I think of kind of what this kind of picture is. I think it's the first time we really see it, in its fully from a completed form. I like it a lot. It's good now as it was then. And I think Evil Dead and I think Army of Darkness are good in their own particular ways. I would still argue that the next one sort of reinvents itself in a different way. But as far as this kind of picture is concerned, I think you said it was seminal, and I agree. It's really good. If you don't come you come for the blood and you stay for the laughs, and it is so. They're very much co-conspirators, Raimi and Campbell. And as you're watching it, you feel like you're in on the joke too, and you're part of the conspiracy. I think you said earlier, Max, that it's subversive, and I agree with that. You're sort of pulled in on it. It's a genre. The horror genre is something that we love. This seems to sort of not laugh at the genre. It's sort of like we all laugh with the sort of subgenre as it becomes so dark and crazy that it becomes comical and slapsticky, and clearly Campbell and Ash really is the butt of all of these horrible actions and these jokes, and we're kind of right in there with him. And because of it, the filmmakers, I think, are gleeful, and so are we. And I think that makes it an enormously entertaining picture, no matter what your expectations are. So it still is super strong for me.
Cool. Max?
One of the things that I kind of noticed about this movie after seeing it again recently is that it follows a formula that I never really realized that it followed, and that kind of reminds me of the Omen formula, where you have a protagonist who is kind of driven to a breaking point, and from that point on, that protagonist is the catalyst for everything that happens. The first film really feels like it's Ash's journey, and this film for me feels as its second part like Ash is kind of like, on a journey himself, kind of in much the same way where Gregory Peck in The Omen is driving the plot. He's trying to figure out what's going on, and he's got to figure out what to do, and he needs to find a resolution. And that's what I love so much about this movie. It follows, in some weird way, Bruce is my Gregory Peck in this. And that I see a lot of things when I watch this movie. That's why I think it endures. It is so nuanced and so textured and so full of stuff going on that I know that still to this day I watch it and I still see something new almost every time I watch it, which is to me the earmark of a truly great or classic film. Something that just continually brings something new to the table as I get older or just as I pay attention, you know. Every time I see it, I'm focused on something else, and when I'm done focusing on that, the next time it comes around, I see something else, and that's why I love this movie.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. For me, I love the movie, and I would totally agree. I see something new each time. Like there's a nuance to it that I notice. Also, you know, from creating a new subgenre. You know, I was looking back through whenever I was, you know, kind of doing prep for the show, and I will have to say though that the poster, which is super iconic, the skull with the eyes in it, is almost a different, like I've seen it as the scary movie where I watched it alone, and then the comedy movie where I watched it ever since the second time I saw it. And I think it's kind of funny that the poster promises something, I think, a lot darker than what you actually get. It's still, and it's such a great poster too. Like it's so iconic, and it's been, you know, ripped off a million times afterwards. And you know, it even harkens back, I think, to a lot of Italian.
You know, all
movies.
three of these have really great posters.
Yeah,
that's back when they used to do really awesome movie posters. Right.
Before everything was, you know, opposite
Photoshop.
of the color wheel. Well,
Yeah.
that and, you know, opposite of the color wheel, so you get blue and you know, orange or whatever to highlight, and you know, it's a bunch of, hey, we're going to take everybody's photo and then just kind of put them together. Yeah, you know, I wish there's not enough of that. You know, these iconic kind of things where you wanted to, even if it ended up being crappy, you wanted to pick it up off the VHS like shelf when you rented it. You know, that was something. There's something amazing to that. But yeah, I really dig this movie. It's definitely my favorite of the series. It's definitely one of my favorite Raimi films for sure. It's sharp. It's got, you know, distilled versions of Raimi, distilled versions of Campbell as we come to know him. Great, you know, effects, just, and a glee in the passion. And we've hit up on this a bunch of times. Give me a movie that maybe this, you know, this is a B movie, but give me a B movie with passion over a, you know, AAA title that has, you know, all the stars and none of them seem to care. Or even if they do care, it's just done in such a way, you know, you can see the design by committee. You can see the 5 screenwriters, one of whom received credit because he was the last guy to touch it and he changed it, you know, 80%. You know, that kind of thing. Like, you have a group of people together to make something really that ends up being really kind of special. And I think you end up with those special things when you have something like this. And I wish there was more of this. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you can make it, there's smaller films that do have this. But, you know, I think why they're special, why they're cult films, even if they're not as big, why people will come back to them. Because it's in the same across all, like a really good album where people are just pouring their heart and soul into it, a really good comic, anything like that where that comes through, and we're going to make this no matter what. You can see that in this movie, and I think that's why we keep coming back to it. So
The Booker T and MGs of the horror community, I think, these guys, you know, it's a bunch of guys just wailing on it. It has real soul, real vibe.
Absolutely.
You can't replicate that. You can't buy it. Michael Bay can't afford it. It's just something that just has to be, you know?
I absolutely agree. So
what you're saying is this is the Sam Cooke record of horror when you say it has soul.
Yeah, it's stacked,
Sure.
man. It's stacked.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're laying it all out there. That's something. That's something I try to do and try to encourage others to do as well. There's no use doing it, especially if it is your passion. You know, for example, my music, like, I work on a lot of things freelance, and I don't always get to be, you know, a lot of it's by committee. You know, I'm working with a team, and that's cool, and I enjoy working collaboratively. But I do not compromise when I'm writing a song or putting it out there as far as that goes, because that's the last thing I have, you know? Like, that's the purity. And for these people, you can tell it's film, and that's always going to come through if it's done right, you know? Nobody messes with it. And I think they got away with that. But so I guess let's do endorsements, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's go again. Let's start with Max, Adam, and then Drew.
Okay. I'd like to recommend a film called Thou Shalt Not Kill Except. It's also known as Striker's War. Synapse just actually put this out on Blu-ray a few years ago. And I don't know a ton of people who've seen it, but I really love it. And it comes from that whole Michigan scene, you know, where you had the Coen brothers and Raimi and Campbell. And Campbell actually co-wrote the script for this with Josh Becker, and it was produced by Scott Spiegel, who produced the Evil Dead films as well. But it really has that kind of like mean-spirited edge where no one just gets hurt in this movie. People get hurt, and then they get hurt again, and it's just a complete exercise in insult to injury. But the story, the original tagline on the VHS tape that I first found kind of just sold me on it, which was, "What if Rambo met Charlie Manson?" And the basic premise is that a guy comes back from Vietnam after being injured, and he's got a permanent limp, and he winds up having to face off with his war buddies against this cult that is very obviously modeled after Manson, who are just kind of like ransacking the countryside and killing people. And the guy that plays the cult leader is actually Sam Raimi. So he gets to be kind of a skeezy kind of bum with bad teeth, and he plays it to perfection. And a lot of it was actually filmed on Bruce Campbell's parents' property, particularly the war scenes, the same property that they actually leveraged against completing Evil Dead. So that's kind of a nice bit of trivia for you. But if you've never seen this movie, you should see it. It's super cheap, it's super fast, it's super crazy, and it deserves a much wider audience than it has right now.
Awesome. Adam?
Cool. On Netflix streaming, I'd like to recommend, there's a documentary out called Milius, about John Milius. And I found it remarkably cool. I worked with John before, and I have to say, there's some things that even I didn't know.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Highly entertaining. He's definitely a maverick. He's definitely a force of nature. And great writer and quite a good director. And really, I'd say, I've heard him called like maybe one of our generations or the previous generations, or one of our modern great raconteurs. And I think he's just a guy who really knows how to tell a story. And I think that this is a great documentary about it.
Cool. Drew?
I'll second that. That's a great documentary.
Yeah, it's on my list, so now I have to go watch it, like, immediately.
I have kind of like a weird half-hearted recommendation this week because it's junk food TV that I kept going back to on Netflix. It's a Netflix original TV series called Hemlock Grove, and it's a werewolf show. And as I've said a bazillion times on the show, I love werewolf movies. So this is like the 13 or so episode werewolf movie produced by Eli Roth. It's not great. I mean, I get what they're trying to do, which is kind of a modern. The two descriptions I would give for it was either sort of a modern Dark Shadows or a very sleazy version of the Munsters, if that makes any sense. It's not great, but every episode there's at least one thing that is cool enough, like either a visual or a scene or a line of dialogue. Because the acting, they've got they have a reasonably good TV cast. It's got Meg Johansson playing a well-to-do vampire. which is entertaining and also simultaneously scenery-chewing. It's got Doug Ray Scott trying to not be John Constantine but not really succeeding. It's got a really, really great werewolf transformation in it. Like, it's got one of the best werewolf transformations I've seen in years. I'm a little disappointed at the end result because it's yet another thing where they think it's okay to have a werewolf that's just a big dog, and that's never okay for me as a monster fan. Give me a fucking monster. But the actual transformation itself is really well done. And, I mean, if you're a werewolf fan at all, which I'm assuming we have more than a few listening to this show, I mean, the show's worth it just for the transformation scene alone. I mean, it's really well done. I'm not really an Eli Roth fan, so I'm actually kind of surprised that I'm enjoying this as much as I have. But if you need, like, junk food TV, if you're, like, waiting for, like, your favorite show to come back or everything, I mean, it's all on Netflix, so, you know, if you hate it, you know, if you're like, oh, screw you for recommending that, Drew, I hated that, you're not going to really feel that bad for turning it off. But, I mean, it's, like I said, every episode there's been at least something that's been cool enough to where I go back to it. If that can be considered a recommendation, there you go.
Yeah, I have a bunch of friends who are watching that, so I've been kind of on the fence. You know, same idea.
It ain't great, but it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. I don't know. Like you said, it's a half-hearted endorsement. So.
Sure. Well, yeah, and we have Darren in the chat room who's endorsing Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which I've heard is amazing. I need to catch up on the previous one, which I didn't see for, I don't even know why. It wasn't like I was like, screw this movie. I just didn't see it. So I need to catch up on that. But I've heard nothing, like all of my friends, and it's been really crazily unanimous on this movie. So I'm guessing it's pretty freaking good. As far as my endorsements, some of these are stuff that have just come out or that I've just been able to see. So I got my copy of, I think we talked about it several times, Possession, the really deluxe version, which came out through Mondo Vision, and I got mine through TwoFan. And wow, that it is truly a lavish box set, like felt lined kind of outside. You know, you push it out, everything's together with magnets, and there's all kinds of little tiny lobby card type things. There's a book. There's it. You know, if you're going to spend premium money for for something, this limited edition Possession is, it's the real deal. And I like the movie a lot, so I'm looking forward. I just haven't had time to just sit down and really give it the attention that that it needs. But wow. The other thing is, I was really sad that the Nightbreed limited edition version of the director's cut, there's two editions. There's like an $80 one, which was, I think, at one point in time $55 on Amazon, and then there's the $20-something one that's, you know, more bare bones. It's still awesome, supposedly. Doesn't come out till October, but I was bummed because I missed out on it, and because they did a run of like 1,000, and they said, wait, no, we're going to do 2,300. Then they said 5,000, and I wrote him and was like, hey, so I didn't get one. Are you going to do, can I be put on a waiting list? And I just saw today that they upped it to 10,000. Wow. So if you're going to get this limited edition version, then now is the time to go to Shout Factory and get that and pre-order it. Again, not till October, but you will, like, I think 10,000 is probably where they're going to go. I don't think we can get the license for more than that. Just from what they emailed me back, they were really responsive and said at the time, like, just keep watching the site just in case. And then I had a friend of mine, another Max, sent me and said, hey, I don't know yet if I can buy it, but, you know, if you're a fan and you're a fan of, you know, when we did Nightbreed, like, if you don't get to the limited edition one now, good luck. And also, finally, on Blu-ray, which I can't get yet either, is Jodorowsky's Dune, which I can't say good enough things. I mean, it is brilliant. Just mad genius, and just what, even though it failed, it kind of almost had to fail so that we would get the sci-fi that we know today. It's remarkable. And I just even had a friend, send me a message and was like, yeah, I'm just now starting. You're totally right. This is amazing. I have yet to find somebody who's like seen it and gone, I guess it was all right. Like it's truly just one of the best documentaries I've seen in recent memory. I can't say enough good things. Maybe somebody who's listening will see it and be that person who goes, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Penny. You're on crack. But I have yet to meet that person so far. So I'm going to go with,
I missed it. I missed the limited theatrical release in Los Angeles. Where can you see it now?
Blu-ray. It's out. Like
so they have actually released it. Okay.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, it was like, this week or last week. It finally came out, and I haven't even seen any of the extras. I got to see it at Fantastic Fest, and the filmmakers were there, and that was really cool. I'm really jealous though, because I know personally a couple people who have gotten tarot readings from Jodo, and I'm actually pretty jealous of those people. Like that just sounds like something that would just be awesome in your life, like to say that had happened, And he's truly all of the charisma and insane genius in this. When you see this documentary, everything that you kind of heard of, you get it when you see him on screen. But also, one of the most inspirational things I came out of it going, wow, everything I need to do, it needs to be better. Like, you see where the aspiration is. Even if you don't, if his films aren't what your cup of tea, the way that he portrays himself and his passion and what he's thinking about for his team and everything, you really get it. And once you see what came out of that, even though that failed as a thing that didn't happen, when you see what came out of it, it touches on, if you're a sci-fi fan at all, and I think there's a pretty big crossover between horror and sci-fi, I think you'll get it,
Right.
So, but yeah, so we'll be back next week with Army of Darkness, and it sounds like we're going to have a lot to talk about as well, and that'll be really awesome. So thanks again for joining us, and spread the word, and thanks for all. We had a ton of new people joining. I hope you like it this week.
Yeah.
Like, it's been really, really great. Thanks to everybody who spread the word. I know Voodoo Queen Management had spread the word for us, and everybody else has been doing an awesome job. We really appreciate it. We love talking about this stuff, and we like that you like hearing us talk about it, and we like to share that as well. So, part of that sharing is posting your thoughts on Facebook and, emailing us and everything like that. We've got some really interesting things, I think, coming up with interviews we want to do. And, we're talking about, Spiegel, one of the co-writers of, this movie. We might even have some stuff to talk about eventually, later, much later. But, it was kind of cool to kind of get some seeds of things that we may be seeing where people are really kind of taking notice, and so that's really awesome too. But we really, really appreciate all of it. And thanks again for Max for joining us, and Adam once again while Jason and Julia are gone. This has been really, really great. So we'll see you next week. Everybody say bye.
All right. Night.
Go on.
Cool. We'll catch you later, and thanks again. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.